Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Miley. And today we thought we'd talk about some of the equipment, I guess, that we use as we're grazing. So we had somebody reach out and was kind of interested in how we're getting water out to the sheep.
Yeah, and I will say, I had a couple individuals send, emails or text messages. Um, and we certainly appreciate the feedback and I know some of them haven't even been, questions, just mentioning, hey, I'm in Kentucky and I'm doing this and I appreciate what you had to say about this. Or another gentleman, I'm in Texas raising this, trying to market lambs in this manner. Don't necessarily have a question, just this is what I'm doing. And that I think that's awesome. So love to see that stuff. Um, so keep it up. But yeah, the kind of what continuation of what we were discussing. If you go back and listen to that other episode, we kind of talk about how Tom is moving his ewes and lambs every day. And as part of that, he's got a wagon set up to provide shade. And along with that, behind the wagon, there's a sled with his water tubs and his mineral feeders. And the question was, how does he get water to them? Like, he's got the tubs out there. I'm rotationally grazing, and the water issue seems to be a tricky one. Um, and I would say, just for me personally, water is probably access to water or providing that water might be the most difficult item, um, or most labor intensive item when we're talking about rotational grazing. So, with your 40-gallon water tanks there, how are you getting water to them on a daily basis, and kind of what are you seeing in terms of consumption with those ewes out on grass?
So, like I said, or like you said, we have those two 40-gallon tubs there. The big thing with those is because the sun's beating down on them all day long, they'll tend to grow algae in them pretty quick. If you want to keep those clean, we just take a brush out with us all the time. And once we start to see those getting kind of ratty looking and a little dirty on the bottom, we'll take that brush and just give them a good scrubbing quick and get that stuff out. Um, I was at an auction, and since then I've seen a whole bunch of these. There was an old field sprayer that you would have sprayed about 8 rows of corn at a time with. And those tanks are right around 200, 250-gallon tanks. And we brought that thing home. The tank was fine. The booms were shot. The nozzles were shot. All the hoses that went to the part that you spray with was all shot. And we just took all that stuff off and left that big tank on there. And just put some new plumbing on it and run to a PTO pump that you can buy at Tractor Supply. They're about $125, $130 now. I think the first one I ever bought was like 65. And and we've got a small tractor. It's about I think it's 28 horsepower or something like that. And it has a PTO on it, power takeoff unit. And so we'll hook that pump right up to that, and we can pull right up beside those and pump that water right out of those tanks, right out of that 200-gallon tank, and just fill those tubs. That's all great until you get into the winter months. And the last thing you want is water in that pump, and you get below freezing temperatures that night, because that water will freeze in that pump and it'll crack that pump. At that point, we use a cart um, that's been around here forever. It's been welded on so many times. There's probably like 7 different carts all built into this one because of so many things we've replaced over the years. But there's I found these 15-gallon uh, drums, I guess they are, that have two bung holes in the top. One's a small one, one's a bigger one, and those unscrew. And I think they come from the dairy industry because they get a lot of that acid that they clean their pipelines with. And so when we get those in, we just triple rinse them. It's not, acids always kind of scares you when you hear that, but they're able to use it in the dairy industry. So it's not, I wouldn't want to take a big swig of it, but we triple rinse them and it seems to be fine with that. But we'll actually set those in the cart and just fill those up and back up. We'll take those out to the field and whatever pasture we're in, back right up to those tubs. And we just lay them down on their side at the back of the cart and just let them just run right into those tubs. The other thing that's really nice about those is if you don't want to take your fence down to back into them, I did this afternoon. I just pulled them off the cart, lay them on their side, and just roll them. Just roll them right up to where those tubs are, stood it up, and then just took the top off and leaned it over the side and let it just gurgle on in. The consumption, when you've got a lot of water in the grass, those ewes haven't been drinking much water at all. That 40-gallon tub, I probably spilled more out of it moving it from pasture to pasture than I have
Than filling water tanks.
Yeah, that had to use drink them. But now all of a sudden today, they drank a good bit. I was just out and moved sheep again, and so while I was there, I just went ahead and filled those up. We're gonna get that sprayer out. I'm gonna get that sprayer out this afternoon, get it all hooked up and ready to go. I took the pump off it last fall, brought it here in the house because I don't want, like I said, I don't want it freezing and cracking and breaking. So it's not that incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and I think when we had talked before, in some intensive rotational grazing applications, we talk about water and having, a specific float system or providing water at a constant rate a lot of times. And I'd argue it's probably more in cattle application because the amount of water we're talking about, just the quantity of water that we have to provide is so much greater to those mature cows than it is, to how many sheep that we're going to have out there. And so, as a rule of thumb, when we're thinking about just generalizing requirements, water requirements, which I think is one of those factors that's overlooked a lot of times when we think about growing animal performance, is we kind of just take water for granted, and it's absolutely crucial for everything that occurs in that body. But we're looking at 1 gallon to a gallon and a half of daily intake per 4 pounds of dry matter consumed. And so if we were to break that down further to what we're estimating that percentage of body weight to be of consumption out on grass, how much water's in that forage that we're utilizing. And so that offers kind of some explanation to that. But definitely on the cattle side of things, and I'm sure there's some flocks in those regular move scenarios that like what you're doing, Tom, that we have to offer some supply of water more constantly than what you're having to do currently. And I know, like, similar situation when we're in our tight rotations or rotations that aren't near those standpipes. There's 2 water access points there on the farm for us personally. And so when we get kind of towards the middle of the farm, or those locations that I can't access with a hose, which is what we try to move sheep in a manner that I can get water to them with 300 foot of hose, and just hooking those up, and that we've purchased at our our local farm store. And again, you fill it up once a day if they need it, and that's been fine. And there's more remote locations where we don't necessarily want to run 600-700 feet of garden hose to to a water trough. Uh, have an IBC tote, so that would be if you've ever seen a square or a cube shaped um, plastic container with the metal cage around it. That's always what I'm not sure what IBC stands for, but that's what we've always called them. They had picked up a couple of those, and that will actually slide on to the pallet forks that we have on the back of the small tractor that we're using. And then there's a lever there and a shut off valve at the bottom of that tank, and hooks up to, I want to say, a 2-inch pipe. And so you open that, and you've got water filled up for, you know, as much as they want to drink for the next 2 days, and try to fill up enough water tubs um, so that you don't have to make that trip every day with water. But yeah, I mean, I'll second your opinion definitely on the out on grass. We can certainly see some reduced water consumption. There's certainly some interesting designs for kind of temporary or semi-permanent water when we're talking about above ground systems, which can get a little tricky up where we're at because of that freeze,
Mm-hmm.
that freezing aspect. But some HDP or high density polyethylene pipe, um, again, you've got to either be working with someone that knows what they're doing, or uh, do the research to understand kind of what you have available to you to push that water, and what's the most effective way of pushing that water to those livestock out on grass. Because the engineering, the physics of pushing that water through a pipe is more complicated than what you may realize. Um,
Using that spray tank, that old sprayer just had that 200-gallon tank. We found that we could not get water to go through, just gravity fed from the bottom of that tank through 100-foot hose. It just,
okay,
it just wouldn't go. It at the very
really?
best it would trickle. It's all because we were using like a 1/2 inch hose, which was way too small in diameter, and there was just too much friction for that water to push through.
Yeah,
So if you want to use, something like that, just try to go with the biggest diameter of everything that you can use, because it's
right.
got so much less resistance. Not to mention, if you're able to hook up a 1-inch line, and even if you're gonna use a PTO pump to push that and fill those tanks, you will fill them up better than twice as fast compared to a 1/2 inch line, just because of the reduction in the friction. It is amazing how that works. Now I know we have an equip contract. We're going to bury about 7,000 feet of 1.25 inch black polyester line. Has to be 160 psi minimum, and then we got a pretty good pump that's going to pump that out across the farm. There's a pretty good grade that has to pump up, and then the plan is to have a hydrant every 200 feet along every other fence row, so that we will always have water right there. Their plan calls for like I can't remember, it's like 80-gallon tub they're talking about with that many sheep. We're going to use
Nice.
like a 10-gallon tub.
With
It's
a
gonna,
float.
yeah, with a little floating. It's going to be pretty small. We're probably going to take one of those 15-gallon uh, barrels and just cut the bottom off it. And that's probably what we'll just end up using, because you don't need that massive refill rate like you do with cattle.
Yeah.
And I know even when we were running the cows, we had those IBC totes. We had 2 of those sitting on an old stock trailer frame, and we would fill those and just gravity feed out of those. And I was using a 20-gallon tub. with that. There's a company called Mueller. You can find them on Amazon. It's just a little brass valve. There's very few moving parts in it. That price tends to fluctuate anywhere from $18 to like $24. We just drilled a hole in the side of this of that small tub and connected that in. We just run a garden hose over to it. We put quick connects on, so it's just easy to get on and off. But every time we move that wagon, we just shut the valves off, coming off those tanks, and then threw that everything else up on the trailer, pulled the head, so everything bounced back off again, turned it on and went. And the only time we ever had any trouble is if the cows would tend to go up there and flip the thing over. And you'd find it, every cow wanted to drink at the same time. That would cause some issues. But
Where you had problems.
yeah, but it's been so much easier to water sheep.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
just-
I think I would like to try, you've got me thinking with your hay wagons. What I'd really like to try is to take one of those IBC totes and put it up on a hay wagon, and then attach maybe even some shade cloth with some lumber support on the side, so you almost have a lean-to coming off the side of the wagon with a shade tarp going out to some T-posts to give you somewhat of an additional shade canopy
I'm
in
trying
those
to think
areas.
of how to just make like wings that we could
Well,
fold
right.
up and
Yes.
just put out. Now
Yeah.
the goats are going away. We made the decision we're going to sell the goats. We're
Oh,
going to
really?
we're going to be goatless in Farmville. It's going to be a great day, I think.
Okay,
And
nice.
it's the whole reason I've not tried the wing idea is because the goats were constantly walking around on top of the wagon.
Yeah.
And I imagine with that shade cloth, they would walk right out on that and go right through it.
Yeah. I'd like to put it up another, 5-6 feet above that wagon floor height. So that I'm not limiting airflow underneath that shade cloth. And then stretching it out. We built a lot for my master's project, that we've touched on, some of the temporary fencing stuff. We called it a water buffalo. I don't know what the technical name was, but it was an old Army surplus tank.
Yeah.
That, just single axle, you hooked it up, you went and filled it up once a week, drove it back out. I don't know how many, hundreds of gallons that it held. And they had a high pressure, municipal line there at the farm that you had to use, because if you was just gone with your regular garden hose, it would have taken you, 3-4 hours to fill the thing up with.
Yep.
And so we would take that out and had an interesting gravity fed setup off of that, where again, just using water hose, like garden hose off of that. And again, the water wasn't shooting out of there at the end, but it was enough to put on some floats with some smaller, probably like you said, 10 to 15 gallon tubs, for all 6 pens of those lambs to consume. Had fresh water all day long whenever they wanted it. But yeah, I'd like to see if I can.
IBC totes. I don't know why I haven't thought of that, Cam. I think I'm going to stick one of those. I'm going to put one of those IBC totes up on top of that wagon now.
Well, and my thought is, if you could at least provide some shade over the top of that.
Well,
maybe you could reduce
the one we built for the cattle, where we had the 2 of them there. It is
Yeah.
wrapped in I guess it's not technically a shade cloth. It's I can't think what it's called now, but it's that fabric you put, geotextile fabric.
Oh yeah.
We got an old roll of that. We covered that with that. It did help keep that water cooler, and we never had any algae grow inside that tank. And I think it's because we kept the sun off it.
And I know I've heard a trick from another producer about putting like pool tabs into their gravity fed system to try to cut down on the algae growth. We haven't tried that, but the only downside is you'd have to hook up the wagon, drive it back down, fill it up. But I'd be curious to know how many days can you go with I think they hold 275 gallon. So if you can fill it up one day a week or one day every 10 days, um, and just bring the wagon down because you're driving up anyway to drop water off on a regular interval. Can you get by with just having a one-stop shop and putting it on top of that wagon? So we're going to try it and see if we can set up a gravity fed system that way. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Well, when we were using that homemade contraption with the two IBC totes sitting on top of it, I have a 500-gallon sprayer that I would fill, and it would take hours to fill it. There's no doubt. I can't remember the exact amount of time now that it took, but I would literally just put the hose in the tank, set the timer on my phone, come up to the house, watch Oprah, and then when my timer went off, I'd say goodbye to Oprah and I'd go out and my tank would be just about full, and then I could shut everything off and I could pump that into those tanks, and it took maybe 15 minutes to empty that big 500-gallon tank into those two IBC totes. And so I would say if you could find one of those old sprayers, and I think those 250-gallon sprayers, there's a bunch of those around that nobody wants anymore because in the agricultural world, they're entirely too small. Nobody wants them. So don't worry about the fact that the booms are all tore up and all that. As long as the tank's good, that's all that matters. Most of them just had 15-inch tires on them. I know 15-inch tires are a lot harder to find anymore, but it's just a matter of keeping air in those tires. And we even took mine off, and I took some old tires and cut them and laid them in that kind of cradle, and then set the tank back on top of that so that it wasn't moving around so much. You didn't want to scratch a hole in the bottom of that. But you could fill those up with that, so that you wouldn't have to bring that whole contraption back somewhere to fill them up. I think that's we're going to try that. I think we're going to put one of those on the wagon. The downside of our wagons are they're pretty rough shape. I'm not quite so sure that one would. I know on the one wagon it will stay on there. I don't know about the other wagon.
Okay.
You might actually fall through. But like I say, all we're using it for is shade. It's not really, we don't care how much weight it will hold on top, just as long as it's shade.
Well, and the nice thing is you only need it temporarily. Ideally, I guess when you're talking on that permanent water, with those frost-free hydrants. So there, we'd mentioned there a couple episodes back, you envision a piece of lined paper. Those horizontal lines are going to be your permanent fence, and then you can draw in with temporary netting where you want to put your paddocks or your daily moves. With the water aspect of it, so you mentioned they're going every 2 lines.
Yep.
So they're going to be roughly 320 feet apart from going north and south on those permanent lines. Do you have any frost-free hydrants that come off of that moving east and west? And how far are you trying to pump water through those frost-free hydrants?
So those, if you look at those lines, like I said, like lines on a piece of paper, there'll be a vertical line that goes up, and that'll be the main trunk line that pushes that water. And then every other line will basically like a T or a cross off of that. And then from that main trunk line, all those hydrants will be 200 feet apart. And the theory with that is that you can then run 100-foot hose and
from either end. Gotcha.
And
okay. So the 200 feet is your horizontal or east to west spacing.
Yep.
Okay.
Gotcha. So those work out to 200 feet apart. Then you'll never need more than 100-foot hose. to reach. My guess is would probably get away most of the time with a 50-foot hose. I'd rather not push that much through. I am worried about that hose getting hot, that water getting hot in the summer months. Not quite sure what we'll do with that, but most of the time, we're not grazing crazy narrow sections with the main flock, so that may not, become much of an issue. We may be able to set it in the tall grass, and maybe it won't get near as hot. But we all know if you leave a hose laying in the sun, that water that comes out of it at first is pretty doggone warm.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it gets toasty pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so I guess we've covered kind of the water equipment aspect side of things. Trying to think if there's anything, additionally to that.
Well, I
When
like
we're
the whole
thinking,
I like the IBC tote idea. Like I said,
yeah,
I don't know why we haven't thought of that before. Those are certainly easy enough to fill up with a PTO pump.
yeah, what and even just I guess if you're gonna use that, you wouldn't have to take the wagon down
No,
every time. You're
no,
just taking
and that
your
to me would be the easiest
pump up.
thing. When we're all set up and going, we don't even need a cart to take any posts or anything like that with us, because we're leapfrogging our fences over, or like I guess it would be what was our back, or what was our front fence now becomes our back fence. And so you always have three of those set up, and then you have one that you're going to take down and move ahead for your next front fence. And we just carry those. We don't put them on a cart to move them. Well, Cam, we're running up on our time here. So it's been good catching up with you. We thank you for listening to the Grazing Sheep podcast. If you want to reach out to us, you can do that at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. So we'll catch up with you later, Cam.
Sounds good, Tom. Talk to
All
you
right,
later.
bye.